boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
This is Rage of the Age, and we have with us a former drug addict and a former welfare chief. He was once arrested by the FBI, but then recognized with a Community Service Award by the FBI director. He's the author of the newly released book, My Addiction and Recovery. Just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you. I want to introduce to you today Ed Kressy. Ed, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Philip. Thanks for having me.
So you were once, as you said, a drug addict and a welfare cheat. Is that something that came, how can I say this, natural to you? Did you come from that background, or is that something you fell into?
No, I was a person who was provided many opportunities in life, grew up in an idyllic setting in the woods of Massachusetts, wanted for very little in terms of material things. In many ways, as it is for a lot of us, from the outside looking in, it was a very good life. And in reality, it was a very good life also. I was instilled by my parents instilled in me a love of reading from a very early age. I loved books. In fact, I adopted a dream very early on in life. My dream was to write a book of my own. Books just gave me such a wonderful means of escape. The worlds of fantasy were so much more attractive to me than the worlds of reality. I loved to use my imagination. I loved to interact with the characters I found in books. I wasn't really interacting with them because they were in books, but in my mind, I sort of was. These types of fantasy worlds and escapes into reading suited me very, very well. Till I got to preteens, early teenage years. At that point, I became a kid who felt quite ostracized and bullied, who was bullied in school. I couldn't fit in with the cliques of popular kids. I was very uncoordinated, couldn't compete on the sports teams. What happened was my dream of writing a book, that fell by the wayside when I discovered drinking at age 14. What drinking did, and it's important to remember, I feel it's important to remember, that if we understand one thing about alcoholism and addiction to drugs, the one thing to understand is that for those of us who are addicted and for those of us who are problem drinkers, booze and drugs, they're not our problem. Booze and drugs are our attempt at a solution. The picture that you just got is a picture of a person, me, who as a boy really couldn't find ways to fit in with people around him until I found drinking and later hard drugs. I did a lot of drinking. I was a heavy, heavy drug user. I was a binge user. I would just consume massive quantities of booze and drugs because I hated myself. At my core, I was always that bullied kid who wouldn't stand up for himself on the playground. I was always the person who had a dream of writing a book, yet lacked the confidence or discipline to pursue that dream. So to get back to your question, for me to become a person addicted to drugs, for me to become a person who cheated welfare, the society set me on a far different path. Yet because of my poor decisions, because of my failure to find effective solutions to my problems, I turned to drinking and drugs. The insidious thing is that many of us find this out. Drinking and drugs work as a solution. They really do. For me, drugs worked for, I think, 15 years. I could get high, I could snort coke, smoke speed, rip hits off the bong, drink massive quantities of scotch, vodka, whatever. They provided a workable solution. I could escape myself. At the same time I was drinking and taking a lot of drugs, opportunities were coming my way. Society provided me opportunities. I had a career with the best firm in America to work for, according to Fortune magazine, this biotech firm, Genentech. They treated me very, very well. So these solutions, and I had other opportunities too. I owned a home, college education. So drugs working as a solution, what happens is when that solution fails, it often fails catastrophically. This is what many of us discover. Yeah, we can go on for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, sometimes even longer, using drugs as an effective solution. Yet when they fail, the consequences can often be catastrophic, which is what happened to me. I ended up spending nights in homeless shelters, months in jail, years in destitution, and in this psychosis. I went into this methamphetamine psychosis where my physical surroundings were bad, yet my headspace was much, much worse. I had become the target of a vast FBI conspiracy to pin 9/11 on me because I had inadvertently befriended a 9/11 hijacker while I was training in kickboxing in Bangkok, Thailand. Also, the FBI was recruiting me as a top secret counterterrorism operative, so deep undercover, not even the FBI knew about me. if you get my drift there.
Yeah.
These things. So what these things do, Philip, and for your audience, obviously they contradict one another.
Right.
I can't be both an undercover FBI operative and the target of an FBI conspiracy. And yet, while I did go to Bangkok and met a guy who looked like one of the 9/11 hijackers, that doesn't by any means prove or even strongly suggest any sort of conspiracy. The point is, the drugs failed so catastrophically that I was immersed into this world of psychosis that was my reality. Just like, or very similar to like when I was a little kid and I escaped into fantasy worlds through books, methamphetamine psychosis allowed me that escape into that world of fantasy. And the sad part is, or depending how you look at it, the tragic part, meaning the tragedy of my poor decisions, led me to taking from society, whereas I had every opportunity to give to society. The tragic part is that my methamphetamine delusions were horrific. They were nightmarish. They harmed me, yet they harmed the people around me even more. Because as poorly as I treated myself, I treated my family and those who tried to help me even worse. The good news is, after I got sober and clean in 2007, and I stayed clean off meth. I stayed clean off drugs since 2007. Society showed me a path to becoming a community servant, which is what you alluded to earlier when the FBI, so much to their credit, allowed me to volunteer for them and it gave me a community service award. I was given the opportunity to do a lot of time, spend a lot of time working with persons who are or were incarcerated. I was able to, thanks to those who mentored me, thanks to those who inspired me, I was able to contribute some small things to the benefit of others who are struggling the way I used to struggle. It has a beautiful ending in many ways. I hurt a lot of people. My actions and decisions were very, very selfish. Yet, without having been a person addicted to drugs, I don't think I would never almost certainly have discovered spirituality. I never would have discovered a path to God. I never would have explored what God and spirituality means to me. And certainly I never would have had opportunities to help law enforcement better serve communities affected by addiction. I never would have had the opportunities to serve our sisters and brothers who were incarcerated. I mean, I would have had those opportunities had I not been an addicted person, yet I would have probably maintained my selfishness so much so that I would have just continued to pursue material things. And not that there's anything wrong with material things. It's fine to have homes and cars and and bank accounts. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the way I was using them. I was using them selfishly. I was taking, and not giving back. My life was just a twisted mess because of me and my poor decisions. And I'm just so fortunate. Many, many incredible people and organizations. They're the ones who deserve the credit for what success I've had.
You said you were trying to escape yourself. Has that been like always your attempt? 'Cause you said like when you were younger, you'd be drifting into these books as a form of escape, and then you go to high school, and yeah, who doesn't want to escape high school and junior high? I mean, sure, but just but then you found there was a connection with people that otherwise rejected you through the alcohol and through the drugs. Are you escaping yourself, or was you looking for connectivity? What do you? It was a little bit of both.
That's a great point. I think we're all looking to escape. In some ways, when we get angry at a motorist who cuts us off, all of a sudden we're escaping into some super being who's got 2,000 pounds of armor around us, right? Because that's what we are.
Right.
No longer are we a human being who has human failings. All of a sudden we're like a knight on a 2,000-pound steel horse, right? So we escape into road rage or some variant of that. And the challenging thing is that our means of escape often make us feel powerful. And anger is a very powerful emotion. It gives us a lot of strength. The problem is that things like anger often consume the wielder as much as the object of the anger, if not more so. So getting back to escapism, I always wanted to escape. Always there was a better world of fantasy right around the corner. As good as my world was, which was very good, the world of fantasy you can always make, fantasy can always be a little bit better. No matter where you are, your fantasy, my fantasies could always make that a little bit better, and then pile fantasy on top of fantasy, and it gets better and better. In terms of connection, I always had very difficult times connecting to others. I think part of that was because I was so self-centered, and I still am very self-centered in many ways, although I'm improving thanks to the help of others. That connectivity, Philip, you bring up a beautiful point, and you're making me think about I think it's Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, a well-known writer and healer of persons struggling with addiction. And I think it's him. I might be misquoting him, but I think it's him that defines addiction as the opposite of connection. Right? So addiction is the opposite of connection. And one hallmark of addicted people is we do tend to isolate. I was nowhere more at home than after everybody else had gone off to their respective spouses or boyfriends or girlfriends. And there I was by myself in my black leather armchair with my baggie of cocaine or my glass pipe and the windows drawn. And as my addiction worsened, the disembodied voices, and even through the years before I went deep into psychosis, I would peer out my blinds and see police cars and police helicopters about to burst, about to disgorge officers and armed SWAT teams to kick down my door. So it was very much a process of me disconnecting from the world around me to sink into my fantasy worlds. That in and of itself might not be so bad. However, since I was doing a lot of drugs, the fantasies often involved paranoia. And I got deeply paranoid. So I would say, for your audience, that escapism, most things are have flip sides. And escapism in and of itself, many of us escape into hobbies. We escape into routine. We escape into movies. And there are very healthy forms of escape. Most people in the world, at least who I encounter, have healthy means of escapism. And more so than that, and so much, it speaks so highly to the people I know, they transform their escapism into means of service to others. For example, when I go to volunteer inside maximum security prisons, the people who I volunteer alongside of, these are amazing, incredible human beings who come from the executive realm. They're executives in tech firms or they do very well in their respective fields. They escape the 9 to 5. They escape the the demands and the pressure put upon them because they're in serious roles and they they take their responsibility seriously. They escape by going into maximum security prison. How ironic, huh? You're escaping by going into prison.
Yeah, you go to prison to escape.
These incredible women and men,
Yeah,
they transform their escapism into service. And they coach men who are incarcerated and turning their lives around. So we can escape for good reasons. We can escape. The reasons maybe aren't as important as how we channel that escapism. I channeled my escapism in very negative fashions. I hurt the world around me. Fortunately, incredible people came along and taught me how to escape in healthy ways that are of service to others. There's a long, rambling way of answering a very insightful question, which I'm going to be thinking about more.
Yes, but it's interesting, though, you bring up a statement that probably shocks some people when you say drugs work.
Yeah.
But I think you mean for a time. Eventually it does catch up with you. But for the time being, it seems to alleviate a lot of problems to the person taking them, right?
Absolutely, it alleviates. Yeah, you put that very well, Philip. It alleviates problems such as, it alleviates some of the worst problems that one can have. You see tragic, terrible sights such, and I've heard these stories in person. Mothers giving birth on sidewalks because their addiction has sunk them to the point where they don't call for help when they're about to give birth, or they don't.
Wow.
You hear stories of. A very good friend of mine caused the death of one of his closest friends.
Wow.
When my friend was under the influence of drugs and alcohol, he served 10 years in prison. So yes, when you say drugs work as a solution, they allow us to escape the shameful things we've done. They allow us to escape because my friend who I just mentioned, he didn't wake up one day and go out and cause the death. This was a pathway. He was on a pathway to where he caused the death of a friend. The woman on the sidewalk, she didn't walk out of her home one day and in the afternoon she was on the sidewalk homeless. The drugs, they tamp down the shame that we feel. They allow us to escape the guilt from the terrible decisions we've made. And this is speaking for myself, but also, I've heard a lot of stories of similar people, but without meaning to speak on other people's behalf. This is what you hear a lot. So we take drugs, we escape our guilt, we escape the terrible things we've done. And then, while we're under the influence of drugs, we do things that are just as bad, if not worse.
Right.
So yeah, they work as a solution. It's what you say is very true. It's a false solution. It's an illusion. Yet, unfortunately, one of the phenomenons of human nature, if you want to put it that way, is that we tend to gravitate as humans towards what is comfortable rather than what brings us happiness.
Yes.
So we do what makes us comfortable. And when we're, as human beings, we would often rather be in familiar situations that are unhappy than would we be in unfamiliar situations that are happy. Okay, right. So the woman on the sidewalk who's in labor, as a person addicted to drugs, those are familiar surroundings. She's familiar with being homeless and being and being addicted to drugs. To quit doing drugs, that brings us to a place where we're not familiar. For me, maybe it's better if I stick to my own story, rather than speaking for other people. For me, although I was miserable and unhappy, never having gone after my dream of becoming a writer, because every time I would sit down to write, I would do a little speed first, or I would smoke a joint or whatever, and then guess what I would do instead of writing?
Right.
More speed, or smoke more dope, or go out with my friends and talk about how I was going to be a writer. That was familiar to me. That snorting speed, that ripping hits off the bong and not writing, that was familiar. I knew I could make it from one day to the next. But to actually pursue my dream of being a writer, the fear of failure that entailed, and even worse, the fear of success, those were unfamiliar situations. Those were uncomfortable. I was I didn't know, of course, I didn't know this at a conscious level, but subconsciously, I was always choosing the path of comfort, which was addiction to drugs and not pursuing my dream and the methamphetamine psychosis. I was always pursuing that familiar path of comfort. Then I was, then would I develop confidence in myself to pursue that unfamiliar path that might have led to success.
What was it, the arrest by the FBI then that kind of broke this comfort pattern for you?
I wish it had. It came close. It came within a year of breaking the comfort pattern. But yes, I used to. I laugh, and I should. I was just a terrible drain on the resources of the FBI. What I used to do is I would show up at the FBI offices.
Oh my.
Yes, I would do it high on meth,
Wow.
or at the very least, having partied on meth the night before. I write about this in my book, how the FBI called me to interview because of the person I met in Bangkok, who I mentioned earlier I thought had been the 9/11 hijacker.
Right.
So the FBI, as they do, they take all, they take these types of tips very seriously, as well they should, because they're protecting innocent people from terrorism.
Right.
I had written to the FBI about this person I knew in Bangkok who I thought might have been one of the Al Qaeda terrorists. The FBI brought me in to interview me. I showed up. I was on meth the whole night before. I mean, I might not have been high when I met with the agents, but I'd been up all night. I would show up. I remember sitting in the lobby of the FBI office. On my lap, I held this electronic, I think it was a guitar amplifier and this was the type I used to think were bugged, that the FBI was putting cameras and microphones in. I would show up. I mean, I have it on I don't think I have it on my website, but I put on my, the point is I would submit these documents that I would go to the FBI offices, and they have a form that you fill out when you're a visitor. And I would write in these visitor forms things like, please stop following me. Stanford University has a conspiracy against. I mean, these aren't the exact words I use, but to this effect. Finally, and finally, I pushed my luck too far. I showed up at the FBI with a bench warrant out for my arrest for failing to have appeared on a previous case. That previous case, I had broken into my relative's home to steal for drug money, which is a whole other shameful story.
Right.
The FBI arrested me for failure to appear, yet in a larger sense, my failure, it represents a far greater failure on my part. I failed on many levels. I failed to use the incredible blessings society had bestowed upon me in service to society. I failed to be a good son. I failed to be a good nephew. I failed to be a good family member. I failed to serve my communities. I just failed on so many levels. So to me, the FBI's having arrested me is highly symbolic. I only spent, I didn't even spend more than a few hours, if that, in jail. I was in a holding cell in the FBI offices. Yet on a symbolic level, for let's face it, a privileged white male, as I was, my socioeconomic background put me in a more advantageous position than others who weren't born into this a higher socioeconomic status such as mine. And the fact that in many ways our society provides opportunities to people with different skin colors and genders. I'm speaking for myself. I know this is true for me. It just, for someone who's given so many advantages as I was, to end up being arrested, especially in the way I was, by the FBI, it was just an abysmal failure on my part, Philip.
Right.
While people, so that's, that wasn't even my low point.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
So I imagine you have this cycle then of you have this sense of failure, of regret, things not done, things you wish you did. You turn to drugs to alleviate it, which causes you to do more things you're ashamed of. and it just keeps feeding into this cycle of shame and suppressing of the shame. At what point, though, for you, did that finally start to make the turn to where you're at now?
Well, it's still turning. It's a gradual process. It's like, and it probably will be going on my entire life. It's like when you cut yourself. You cut yourself, you heal. The cut heals slowly. If it stops bleeding after a while, and then it starts to close, and then the scab forms, and maybe you have a scar, and you might have a scar for your entire life. The point where it started to turn, where it really started to turn, was when I discovered a belief in God. I discovered a belief in a spiritual presence in my life. I made that belief my number one priority. I pursued a path to God and spirituality. I put that number one at the top of my list. I read spiritual texts. I spent time in spiritual communities, from the Hare Krishnas to the Hasidic Jews, and all types of communities in between. All of them were amazing. They were all awesome. I learned so much from so many people who took their time to educate, enlighten me, to share with me their own journeys. Ultimately, I discovered my own personal belief, and that belief, relates to a God being. God exists inside me, and in addition to the faith-based community of which I'm a part, and in addition to the amazing work that the faith-based communities do, I really, discovered if God is inside me, as I believe God is inside all of us, if that's what we choose to believe, I got to not be afraid to look inside myself. If I want to find God, I got to not be afraid to look inside myself. And although I maybe couldn't intellectualize that when I first got clean off meth, somewhere inside me that was kind of the tiny spark, and I fanned that spark with conversations, with readings, with meditation, with all kinds of things, and eventually that spark grew into a tiny flame, and ever since that flame's been growing and growing, and sometimes it looks like it goes out, and sometimes that flame dims. Yet when I look back, my path has always been towards closer, greater connection to God. And that, getting back to what we were talking about before, the challenge of drugs and addiction, one challenge is that we need a better solution.
Mm-hmm.
The intuitive answer to addiction is to quit doing drugs, right? You're addicted to drugs, quit doing drugs, everything will be fine. I believe that too. I fooled it's so you would think that it makes perfect sense on the surface. If you're addicted to drugs, quit drugs. Yeah, it makes sense. But really, Philip, for an addicted person, quitting drugs is often the worst thing, or it often makes things worse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not the worst thing; it's a necessary thing. It makes things worse. When we quit drugs, we got no more solution. We got no more solution. That's why, in many cases, certainly in mine, it's so hard to quit doing drugs, because we got to set aside our solution. When we get clean, we got to find a better solution. For many of us, for me certainly, that better solution is spirituality.
That's an interesting point. You're ripping the rug basically from under somebody and saying, "All right, go on your own," but you don't replace. Well, as you said, the solution, the way in which you deal with the world. I guess there's nothing replaced with it. It's just to quit doing it, move on, act normal. But you learned a different normal. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You learn a different normal. What I like to say is that just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you.
Right.
And for me, what that line means different things in my life. It means that even after I quit drugs, I continued to experience forms of psychosis. I continued to hear disembodied voices and entertain beliefs in government conspiracies. And this is for years and years after I quit drugs. I was suicidally depressed for years. For many of us, what it means is that the drugs are not done with you because they still keep calling to you as a means of a solution. Right? Or drugs aren't done with you because they leave that hole which you feel the need to replace with food or unhealthy relationships or something.
Right.
The point, we gotta find that solution. We got to find whatever that new solution is going to be. And it doesn't, of course, it doesn't have, by no means does it have to be God or have to be spirituality. Many find their solutions in triathlons or in various forms of service to others, or in meditation, or in hobbies, or whatever it may be. But one thing I think is true in many, many cases is that if we get to the point of being addicted to drugs, we got to put those drugs aside with an eye on really immersing ourselves in the better solution, whatever that it might be to an individual and a family.
I guess the question then would be, how do you get someone to see that the solution they have in the drugs is not the better solution, that there is a better solution? How would you recommend telling that to somebody? Because I mean, I'm speaking on this from the perspective of you're on the outside looking in. You may have that relative or that friend, and they're struggling with drugs, and you don't know. You've tried every wit's end to do whatever about it, and and they're probably hearing you like, yeah, I know. Okay, so how do I get them to accept they need this better solution? Where do I start?
I don't think you can tell them in many cases. I don't think it's something that can, on an intellectual level, be told to a person. I feel it's got to be shown. It's often got to be shown. You have to put in front of that person someone who's walked the same paths as she has, suffered similar circumstances as the person. What often works the best, and is far from guaranteed, is showing that others have done it. We've escaped similar circumstances as you are facing now. It's a subtle, difficult thing to explain in words. Oftentimes, a connection between one person who's experienced addiction and another person who's experienced addiction is a connection that just can't be duplicated by any other means. It can't be something that's explained. It can't, or it can be. It's just very, very challenging. The complexities are such that until we've walked in the shoes of a person who's struggling with addiction, it's very hard. It's almost like an intangible way of communicating outside of words.
So who then is I guess, the target audience of the book then? Who are you writing to when you wrote your book, My Addiction and Recovery? Is it the person in the addiction or others?
So what readers get out of the book is readers get hope in the possibility of redemption. Readers get a powerful story of second chances. The audience, absolutely people who are struggling with addiction. The book resonates with them. The book resonates with people who are part of what I like to think of as the second chance community, meaning people who believe in the power of second chances, and people who are inspired by stories of second chances. The audience are people who can believe or want to believe that second chances benefit those who receive them, yet they also benefit those who give them. Readers get insights into the root causes of addiction. Readers get a powerful story of the possibilities for when law enforcement gets on board with solving problems related to incarceration and addiction. And that's a whole subject and a long discussion, which I'm happy to go into, but to put it in a concise way, I am so fortunate to have encountered so many women and men in law enforcement who truly care about the plight of addicted persons. I've met so many women and men wearing the badge who took time to talk to me, to have coffee with me, to show me their humanity, to listen to my story, to tell me their stories. They helped me get over a deep paranoia of law enforcement. They also showed me possibilities for when individuals from two of America's most polarized groups, cops and people whom they arrest, come together on a human level. The cop who arrested me the first time I got arrested, she and I are friends now. She and I are friends. We've gotten together a couple times. We sent text messages. getting back to your question, if these types of stories, if you're a person, if you're a reader with an interest in these types of stories, with an interest in these types of transformative possibilities, this book is absolutely for you. And it goes to can I talk about the causes the book supports?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. If you buy a copy of my book, 10% of profits get donated to Defy Ventures, which is a nonprofit that delivers entrepreneur and employment training to currently and formerly incarcerated men and women. In addition to that, we're doing a cool thing. We are, for every copy of my book purchased, we're donating a copy to an incarcerated person who's enrolled in a transformational program, usually of employment or entrepreneurism. So you'll be supporting not only your own reading entertainment and your own further education into addiction and second chances. You'll also be helping others who are doing the same things.
And that book is called My Addiction and Recovery. Just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you.
Yeah.
And I believe you can find that on Amazon. Is that right?
You can absolutely, you can find it wherever books are sold. Yeah.
Where books are sold on Amazon.
Amazon, yeah.
You get it.
Yeah.
Now
you send me an email and I'll send you a copy from my home if you want.
That it resonates with me a little bit that you said that there's a hope of second chance in this.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine you reach a point in doing your drugs where you believe there is no getting out of it. There is no second chance. You've burnt every bridge you could possibly have. Where do I go from here? But you and many others are an example that there is the possibility of second chances. So tell me about how you were arrested by the FBI.
Yeah.
But then later you get an award by the director of the FBI. I mean, if that doesn't show change in, one person's setting, then what does, right?
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful to the FBI, and I'm so grateful to our sisters and brothers who are or were incarcerated, because ironic as it may seem, but both groups of people gave me the inspiration to believe in myself. I'm so grateful to the FBI, and I'm grateful to our sisters and brothers who are or were incarcerated, because as ironic as it may seem, both groups of them, out of all the help I received, those groups gave me some of the most meaningful help. The FBI, I decided at some point that if I was ever going to overcome my fear of the Bureau, and if I was ever going to overcome my fear of cops and really bring what I could of value to the world, I was going to have to face my fear. There's a quote from Joseph Campbell: the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. I might not have known that quote at the time, but something inside me believed in that. Along the way, I had become an instructor of Krav Maga. So for those who don't know Krav Maga, it's similar to martial arts. It's really more self-defense. It's an Israeli system. Because I'd still harbored this deep fear of injury, going back to when I was a bully, I was afraid of getting beat up or backing down from fights, or even though all of my life I was too cowardly to really stand up for myself in a lot of ways, which manifested in, I get drunk and try to bully people, but it was always because I was a coward. The point is, I took a healthy approach to my childhood fears related to having been bullied. I became a Krav Maga instructor. That went very well, thanks to the incredible community around me, thanks to my fellow students, thanks to my instructors. When I was training Krav Maga, it just so happened that one of my students was on the FBI SWAT team. Okay. Now, and also along the way, I had volunteered as a first responder. But I did that for about 8 years total, because I wanted to. When I was addicted to meth, I was terrified of comets crashing into the earth and this global conspiracy, end of the world apocalypse again. So, becoming a volunteer first responder helped me deal with all that, deal with the ongoing fears around that. These things kind of converged, and I think Henry David Thoreau wrote, when we really set our intentions and we pursue them, the universe conspires to help us, or something like that. So I really took a very determined approach to overcoming my fears, to serving my communities. It all came together, and I found myself standing in front of the FBI SWAT team in San Francisco, right? But instead of kicking down my door and dragging me off to prison for the 9/11 conspiracy, they were my students.
Wow.
Incredible, man.
Yeah.
The very people I've been so afraid of, the FBI SWAT team, they were my students. A good friend of mine, my mentor, Rory Miller. Rory is he's a very well-known self-defense instructor. He's a globally recognized author and teacher. Rory Miller was there co-training this unarmed self-defense session for the SWAT team. One of the FBI leads really appreciated it. He nominated me to what's called the FBI Citizens Academy. This is a very selective program whereby the FBI brings in civilians such as people who represent Muslim communities, people who do security for the tech firms, because this is in San Francisco where there's a lot of tech. One of my fellow students was a board member for an amazing nonprofit that assists children who are the victims of sex trafficking. There were others on board. So all of us are in this FBI Citizens Academy. From there, I get this remarkable access to FBI agents and executives. So I get the chance to actually meet with FBI agents and help them better serve communities affected by incarceration. We did things like we took a survey of a number of formerly incarcerated persons on what are their perceptions of the FBI and how can the FBI improve. And I was able to share these results with very high-level FBI executives. I wrote articles, one in the Washington Post and elsewhere, promoting positive perceptions of the Bureau. I'd like to stop here for a minute and just say that, by no means do we intend a blanket endorsement of all things law enforcement, right? We know terrible, tragic actions have been taken in the name of law enforcement. We do not by any means endorse that. What my role is to recognize the good things that women and men in law enforcement do, that be they little or be they not so little, the kind words that cops say, the opportunities that the FBI gives a person like me. I look at these things that are good and that are beneficial, and by focusing on them, my hope is that they will expand. We'll see more beneficial and more good things between law enforcement and people from marginalized communities.
Amen.
Thank you. And to get to May 2019, it was incredible. The least likely person in the world. If you ever think it's impossible for you to accomplish something, I will tell you, the least likely person in the world, one of the least likely persons to ever meet the director of the FBI and shake his hand and receive a community service award, did just that. On May 3rd, 2019, I was in the J. Edgar Hoover building, shaking hands with Director Christopher Wray. 12 years before that, I had been stalking the sidewalks and having screaming matches with invisible FBI stealth bombers that were following me and beaming disembodied voices into my head, man. I was toting I had a 357, a pistol that I would tuck in my waistband and take it with me almost everywhere because of the FBI conspiracy I thought was after me. I believed it was after me. And the FBI, Philip, we could be here for a long time. They, the FBI put pictures of me in Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. They put doctored pictures of me, not in reality, but I was certain that the FBI was doing these things. Wow. So for me to come from there to be in a role of volunteering, assisting the FBI, help people affected by addiction. I've given a couple of talks on behalf of the FBI to raise awareness around the opioid crisis. Yeah, man, just about anything's possible in life. If there's help out there, oftentimes there is. I know it's true for me. There's certainly, when we look inside, even if the help doesn't seem to be available from the outside, I have found that by looking inside and undertaking a dedicated search for a form of God that we choose to believe in, I have found that by opening up one's mind to the possibilities for God and spirituality, I have found that by doing things in service to others, we don't have to be Gandhi. We don't have to be Mother Teresa. We don't have to be Dr. Martin Luther King. We can do small things. We can do things in our own way. We can think positive thoughts. We can say prayers. I have found that by doing that day after day, step by step, one moment, hour day, week at a time, we can really kind of accomplish some remarkable things. And we can do it on behalf of a God we believe in, and we can do it on behalf of our fellow human beings.
So in the end, you're saying there's hope, there's forgiveness, there's second chances, and you can do this. You can walk away from that addiction that doesn't want to let you go and go somewhere.
Beautiful sentiments, man. And you couldn't come at a more perfect time of year. I love it.
Yeah, especially for this time of year,
Especially this year.
Exactly right.
You said it,
Yeah.
man.
So the name again of the book is My Addiction and Recovery. Just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you. And if you're listening to this and you comment on, go to Rage the Age, the Facebook page, comment on this episode, or go to Rage of the Age now, and comment on the Twitter post there of this episode and say, I want a copy of this book, and I will select one of you, and I will personally get you a free copy of this book for you to have. Ed, it has been wonderful having you with us today.
Thank you, Philip. Happy holidays. God bless everyone.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
For this essay segment, I want to contrast some viewpoints of how we look at human responsibility and the cause for human action. This is sort of spurred in me by the interview I had with Ed Kressy and his amazing story of where he started, what he ended up in, and how he came out of that. It's an inspiring story, one that I hope influences others to get out of the pit that they've dug themselves in. But if you remember early in the interview, he was talking about he didn't grow up in an atmosphere that would, as many would believe, gear him towards immediate drug use. He didn't grow up in an atmosphere where everyone did the drugs, or he was on the streets, or with the gangs, or whatever. It's not the typical story you would think that, oh, that explains how you got into that. He had every advantage. He had no lack of anything. Yeah, he had a good life. He recalls it was a good life, but he still went down that road. It made me think, in many years lately, as I've come across different things I have read and watched, and things I've been forced to learn in universities, there's this idea that's floating out there, and it contradicts itself depending on what people want to believe, apparently, even in the same sentences sometimes. But there's this idea out there, first off, that a person's not at fault for what they do. It's society's fault, because society basically set the conditions that led that person down the path that they went. And therefore, it's society's problem. It's society's issue. And this is heavily slanted that way in 99% of sociological classes. It's not the person's responsibility. It's society's fault, basically. So it presents this amazing idea that if a person's surroundings were better, they would be better. If they had better education, it's always that, enlightenment thing that, if they just knew what we knew, they would so much be better people, right? That if they had access to higher levels of education, and they had access to job opportunities, and if they had, special programs to help them along the way and break down these barriers, then they wouldn't go down these bad roads. I mean, I don't know how many examples I have to run across to where that's just not always the case. This was one of them. But it's insisted that, if we provide everything to the person and everything works out right, basically they would come out okay and society would benefit, and therefore we would reduce our problems. So basically, society hurts itself, which causes people to hurt society. But if society would come together and just, fix these social ills that, of course, are, according to a certain political viewpoint, not looking at the whole picture, then, society will get better. Of course, this is contrasted with the opposite idea that the individual is responsible for what the individual does. One of the things that I truly respect and appreciate from Ed Kressy in having the talk with him that I did is he didn't try to blame other people. He took the responsibility for himself. I having gone through our interview and editing it and listening to it again, I was really impressed. And I respect him greatly because he had the courage to say, I was a failure here. I was a failure as this kind of a person. I failed to do this. He owned up to his own responsibilities. And I believe that is part of what helped him and continues to help him on his road to recovery from the pit that he fell into. He's not blaming everybody else. He's taking responsibility sorely on his shoulders, and he's moving in the direction to rectify it. Now, that is absolutely in contrast, of course, with the idea that, well, it's not my fault. Society made me do this. If we don't own up to our own failures, if we don't own up to our own lack of responsibility, we are never going to take any steps to correct them. It's easy to blame somebody else. It's easy to say it's this group's fault because it's always a group. It's not one person. It's that group. And if that group wasn't there, if that group lost power or gave away some of their resources, then I wouldn't be in this circumstance. But I can't help believe that that's just not true. It starts with the individual. Personal accountability is where it begins. That you can't hold anyone responsible for your actions other than what you yourself does. I mean, if you just investigate a little bit further, and you take this idea that a person turns out the way society makes them, then why is it that certain people raised by a society turn against that society? Shouldn't they be what they were programmed to be? It's because we're human beings. We're not computers. We're not machines. We're not cogs in a wheel that you're just made it. You will be what we teach you and go here. And then society will just fix itself and run. No, we're human beings. We're complicated. We're interrelated. We're built by relationships towards one another. And in fact, he brings up a good point that a lot of times addictions are created because of a lack of good connections and relationships. And I don't see this as an accident, as we live in a time where the idea of relationship is even frowned upon. Why? Because someone's afraid a relationship might define them. This fear of being defined, I'm surprised more people aren't on drugs. The total absolute lack of certainty in how we relate to one another. But if people can think for themselves, and they can, if we can do things contrary to what society demands and still prosper, and we do, if people have been raised a certain way, but then later turn away from that, then that means that society does not have a monopoly on how a person turns out. How many societies and countries, especially socialist countries, have continuously tried to brainwash their youth, their population, to think and act a certain way, and people still don't do it. They still don't believe it. They still resist it. There's only so much society can do. In the end, it comes down to this. We are responsible for ourselves. We are responsible for what we do and us ourselves. And I'm going to add that we answer to God for what we do. In the end, that's who the great judge is. Society will come and go with its standards. To that, I agree. Society changes its mind. People act more selfish or they act more guilty. There's these trends. There's these feelings through the ages, the rage of the age of the time, the zeitgeist that's going on, where this is the current thing that everybody's concerned about, and society gets in a frenzy about it. But you know what? In a generation, people forget, and something new comes along. Yeah, to that, I agree. But as far as what we ourselves do, we ourselves are responsible before God, and we answer for it in the end. You can't blame anyone else for how you handle it.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.